violence, and on in so many ways, it was a terrible.
Hollywood has seen many tragedies, but none has haunted the world quite like the death of Natalie Wood, the radiant star of West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause. On the night of November 28, 1981, she was found drowned near Catalina Island, only a few hundred meters from the yacht Splendor, where she had been with her husband Robert Wagner and co-star Christopher Walken. The report at the time concluded it was an accidental drowning. But the strange bruises, the suspiciously long delay before she was reported missing, and her lifelong fear of water made the public refuse to believe in the word accident. For more than 40 years, the truth was buried beneath the waves, and the last man to see Natalie alive, Christopher Walken, chose silence. Until now, at 81 years old, he has finally broken that silence with a single short sentence, but one powerful enough to shake all of Hollywood. Not everything was written in the report. One line that reignited everything. What really happened that night? Why did Christopher Walken choose to stay silent for half a lifetime? And why only now has he decided to speak? Let's find out. When Natalie Wood took on the role in the 1981 science fiction film Brainstorm, her co-star was Christopher Walken, the Oscar-winning actor known for his cold gaze and strangely magnetic presence. The two quickly grew close. Walken was different from the rest of Hollywood, calm, introspective, and the kind of man who made you feel truly heard. For Natalie, he was a rare moment of understanding in a world that had grown too noisy, too demanding. But that closeness did not escape the eyes of Robert Wagner, her husband, once the image of masculine perfection on American television. Their love had long been considered destiny. They married, divorced, then reunited as if fate couldn't bear to keep them apart. Yet beneath the glamour of red carpets and champagne parties, cracks had begun to form. And Walken, whether by accident or design, became the quiet center of those unspoken suspicions. When filming wrapped, Wagner invited Walken to join him and Natalie on their yacht, the Splendor, a lavish vessel moored in Los Angeles for a Thanksgiving weekend getaway. It seemed like a friendly gesture, but years later, many would call it the invitation that sealed Natalie's fate. On November 27, 1981, Splendor departed Marina del Rey, sailing toward Catalina Island off the coast of California. The sea was calm, the wind gentle, the kind of perfect evening made for laughter and wine. 3 people, 1 famous couple, and 1 quiet co-star set out from the mainland, not knowing that only 2 of them would ever return. Because sometimes tragedy doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a lingering glance, a careless word, or a glass of wine poured too late into the night. And that night, under the still waters of Catalina, another story began. A story that even 40 years later, Hollywood has yet to forget. From that moment, the world began asking questions that still have no answers. What really happened aboard the Splendor on Thanksgiving night, 1981? That afternoon, Marina del Rey shimmered beneath a golden sunset. The Splendor, over 18 meters long, slipped quietly from the dock carrying 4 souls: Natalie Wood, Robert Wagner, Christopher Walken, and Dennis Davern, the yacht's captain. They sailed toward Catalina, just 30 kilometers from Los Angeles, a short, ordinary weekend trip. No one could have imagined it would become a voyage of no return. The day passed peacefully. The sea was gentle, the wind soft. Natalie wore a white sweater, laughing as Walken told stories from the Brainstorm set. Wagner, as usual, sat quietly sipping wine, his smile faint. Everything seemed perfect until the sun dipped below the horizon and the 3rd and 4th glasses of wine were poured. Under the dim yellow lights of the deck, Walken and Natalie spoke about work, about art, about the kind of roles she longed to play again. She smiled faintly and said, I miss acting for passion, not for fame." Wagner said nothing. He swirled his glass eyes, fixed on them. No one noticed that the space between the three of them was changing closer between the co-stars farther from the husband. As the night deepened, the air thickened with alcohol and tension. According to Captain Dennis Davern, who later broke his silence, the mood turned heavy. A careless remark from Walken about career, a look from Natalie and Wagner snapped. Voices rose, arguments turned to shouting. Glass shattered. Something heavy struck below deck. Then, silence. After that, Davern recalled there was a stillness so cold it made the hair on my neck stand up. I heard footsteps on the deck, a splash, and then nothing. Around midnight, Natalie was gone. No one, not even Walken, knew the moment she disappeared. Wagner claimed she went to bed. Walken said he heard a noise but didn't think it was serious. It wasn't until dawn that they realized she was missing. 3 hours later, her body was found floating near Catalina's shore, dressed in a nightgown, red jacket, and socks. No shoes, no dinghy nearby. The sea was gray, the air sharp with cold, and the sound of Coast Guard engines echoed through the mist. The first report concluded simply, accident. She fell while trying to tie down the dinghy. A short sentence to close the life of a luminous star. But everyone who knew her director's friend's family disagreed. Natalie was terrified of water, her sister Lana Wood said. She would never go near the deck alone. Never. So why did she leave the cabin? Why did a woman haunted by her fear of drowning end up alone in the dark sea nearly 2 kilometers from the yacht? No one could answer. Police closed the case under accidental drowning, but the public didn't believe it. The press didn't believe it. And perhaps most haunting of all, the man still alive on that yacht, Christopher Walken, didn't seem to believe it either. From that night on, silence began. A silence heavier than the waves off Catalina, and it would last for 40 years. The next morning, as sunlight broke over the gray water, newspapers everywhere screamed the same headline, "Natalie Wood dead at 43." Photos of her body shrouded in a white sheet beside the soaked red jacket stunned the world. Hollywood mourned a golden-era icon gone in mystery. Robert Wagner, grief-stricken, appeared on television. Voice trembling, "I lost the most important part of my life." Christopher Walken. The only other man aboard that night vanished. No interviews, no statements, no appearances. He erased himself from the story that everyone else was desperate to tell. Months later, in one rare encounter with reporters on a New York street, he stopped only long enough to whisper, "Nobody really knows what happened. It was a tragedy." Then he walked away, leaving behind hundreds of unanswered questions. From that moment on, he seemed to close the door to the world. Those who had worked with him said Walken had changed greatly. He spoke less, laughed less, and always kept his distance. He used to crack strange jokes that made the whole crew laugh, but after 1981, that humor vanished. In his eyes, there was something both empty and heavy, as if his mind was still trapped somewhere amid the waves of Catalina that night. One co-star once said, "In his eyes, I saw 2 Christopher Walkens, one standing before me and one still lost on that boat." Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Walken continued to act, appearing in eccentric villain roles or lonely characters he portrayed with a cold, unsettling energy. But the perceptive ones could tell, behind every performance lingered a quiet sadness, a feeling he no longer acted out, but lived with. The press never stopped mentioning him whenever Natalie Wood's case resurfaced. Tabloids called him the last witness, the man who knows the truth but stays silent. Though there was no evidence against him, Walken remained a shadow in Natalie's story. Yet he never justified himself or reacted. When asked, he only gave a strained smile and said briefly, "I don't want to talk about it. It's in the past." Public opinion was divided. Some believed his silence was out of respect for the deceased. Others thought he was hiding something deeper, fear perhaps, or guilt. One journalist wrote, "Christopher Walken's silence is the thinnest and strongest veil Hollywood has ever seen." Over the years, that silence became part of him like a second skin. It followed him on set, in interviews, even in the audience's gaze whenever he appeared. People began calling it the silence of Walken. A silence so strange it seemed to have a life of its own. Because when a man doesn't speak, the world will speak for him. And the fewer words he said, the more haunting Natalie Wood's death became. New theories surfaced endlessly: jealousy, murder, accident, cover-up. Yet amid all that noise, Walken chose to remain outside it all, quiet as the Catalina night, perhaps having seen, heard, or felt something that even at life's end he still could not say. And so 40 years passed, hundreds of articles, dozens of documentaries, thousands of rumors. But Christopher Walken never spoke. Only once, when a reporter asked if he still thought about Natalie Wood, Walken gazed into the distance and whispered, "It stays with me." A short answer, but chilling. For sometimes silence itself is the saddest confession of a lifetime. For nearly 3 decades, Natalie Wood's death was considered a tragic accident. The case was filed away in the Los Angeles police archives, and the public grew used to the ambiguity. Each year around late November, the press would print a few memorial lines, then fall silent again. Only those who had been on the splendor that night were never truly at peace. Among them was a man named Dennis Davern, the Splendor's captain, who had sworn to police in 1981 that Natalie's death was an accident. He kept that statement for nearly 30 years, until one autumn morning in 2009, when he appeared on live television and uttered the words that stunned America: "I lied." Davern confessed that the night had been far from calm. His voice was hoarse, trembling slightly, but his eyes full of regret. There was arguing, shouting, and fear. "I heard it all." According to his new account, Robert Wagner grew angry after dinner, jealous of how close Natalie and Walken had seemed. A glass fell, words were exchanged, and then Davern said a real confrontation broke out in the cabin. He remembered hearing things crash, Wagner shouting, and then silence. Minutes later, only the sound of waves and the cold wind remained. Natalie was gone. Davern said he begged Wagner to call for help, but Wagner refused, saying she probably went somewhere, she'll be back soon. When Davern finally called the Coast Guard, it was too late. Dawn was near, and Natalie had been dead for hours. That confession shook Hollywood. Newspapers that had long moved on suddenly reignited the story. Everyone wanted to know, why had Dennis Davern stayed silent for 30 years? Fear, pressure, or someone who made sure he couldn't speak? 2 years later, in November 2011, the LAPD officially reopened the case. And in 2018, they released shocking news: Robert Wagner, the husband who had been on the boat that night, was listed as a person of interest in the investigation. The new inquiry delved into details once overlooked. Forensic experts re-examined the scene photos and medical reports, realizing the bruises on Natalie's body did not match a random fall into the water. One investigator said, "We believe something happened before she went overboard." Meanwhile, in a small house in Connecticut, Christopher Walken, then nearly 75, his hair white, his voice slower but still deep, was also contacted by police. According to internal sources, Walken cooperated privately. He did not evade. He recounted that everyone had been drinking that night, that Wagner and Natalie argued, and that the atmosphere on the yacht grew tense. When asked if he had seen or heard anything unusual afterward, he paused for a long time and said only, "I remember the wind was very strong." And then, nothing. That was all he said, accusing no one. defending no one, just a quiet confirmation that the night had not been peaceful. Walken's testimony combined with Davern's confession reignited the Natalie Wood case. Major outlets like the Los Angeles Times and Vanity Fair ran investigative series. TV specials aired. Fans worldwide debated fiercely. Yet even with the reopened file, justice stood still. There was still not enough evidence to charge anyone. Robert Wagner, then 90, refused all interviews. He neither confirmed nor denied anything. "I've said all I know," he stated through his lawyer. "I just want to be left alone." Meanwhile, Christopher Walken chose his old way, silence. But this time it felt different. Not avoidance, but fatigue, a quiet acceptance that some truths, even if spoken, would find no one brave enough to hear. People asked again, if there's truly nothing, why does Walken still carry that haunted look in his eyes after 40 years? Perhaps only he knows. For sometimes truth doesn't just crack. It dissolves into silence, lying still beneath the Catalina waves, where the splendor's lights once shimmered, before fading into the Thanksgiving night of 1981. The 1980s were an era when fame outweighed truth. Studios, producers, and the media together built a colossal wall of honor, burying scandals beneath smiles for the camera. In that world, silence wasn't cowardice, it was duty. A single misplaced word could collapse an empire. One rumor could destroy a career overnight. For Christopher Walken, 1981 was the peak of his fame. He had just won an Oscar, was in high demand, and each new role could elevate him among the legends. But then Natalie Wood's death struck, and suddenly he went from a rising star to the last man to see her alive. In an instant, his shining career hung precariously between light and darkness. Those in the industry knew the rule well: if you want to survive, stay silent. One agent told him bluntly, "Christopher Hollywood doesn't need another scandal. Say nothing and you'll be protected. Just keep acting and forget it ever happened." That simple yet cruel sentence defined Walken's only choice. If he spoke the truth, he'd lose everything. If he stayed silent, he'd survive, at least in Hollywood's eyes. As for Robert Wagner, with his influence and image as a beloved husband, he stood in a far stronger position. In 1980s, Hollywood idols were untouchable. The industry would rather protect a reputation than confront the truth. If forced to choose between truth and fame, it would always pick the latter and hope the audience never noticed. So everything fell quiet. News reports vanished, interviews were edited, some testimonies disappeared from the files. The case was swiftly labeled an accident and pushed off the front pages. Walken kept acting. Wagner returned to television, and Natalie Wood remained only a black and white photo on a magazine cover. Hollywood did what it does best, turned tragedy into legend and truth into something no one dared mention. Yet no one can escape forever. As fame's lights dimmed, Walken began to face himself. In one of his final interviews, he said softly, "Silence doesn't protect you forever. Eventually, truth finds you." The words sounded like a confession, or perhaps a warning to Hollywood itself, where silence is an art of survival. And maybe that's why even in old age, Christopher Walken's eyes still carry that shadow. For in a world where reputation is guarded by walls of deceit, he remains the one man who carries both the truth and the fear of speaking it. Sometimes the most terrifying thing in Hollywood isn't the scandal, it's the silence of those who witnessed it. Time quietly passed. 40 years after that fateful night, Hollywood had changed. Christopher Walken, now 81, was just an old man with silver hair living reclusively in a small house in Connecticut, far from the spotlight that once made him a legend. He no longer acted much, rarely gave interviews. But one autumn afternoon, in a rare conversation with a film magazine, Walken said something he had never admitted before. His voice was low, raspy, trembling slightly with age, yet chillingly clear. "I regret it. There are things I should have said. No one knew whom he meant, Robert Wagner, Natalie Wood, or himself. But that one sentence was enough to stun the entire media. For the first time in more than 40 years, Christopher Walken had implied that the night in question was not just an accident. In the interview, he didn't accuse anyone, didn't reveal any details. He simply added one quiet line that sent chills down the spine. Sometimes silence can kill a part of you. Major newspapers reprinted his words, calling them a confession through silence. Those short sentences spread like a crack through the wall that had been sealed for decades. Television shows and podcasts across America immediately began dissecting the case again, replaying old footage, analyzing every expression Walken had made over the past 40 years. But Walken himself seemed indifferent. When the interview ended, he stood up, gave a faint, sad smile, and quietly left. The reporter later recalled that as Walken reached a window, he stopped, gazed at the sea for a long moment, and whispered as if to himself, "The waves are still there." But she's not. The room fell silent. For Christopher Walken, that may have been the final release. For years he had lived with a buried memory, haunted by the thought that maybe with just one small action, one word at the right moment, everything could have been different. For the world, his confession came as a late shock, a reminder of a mystery, long thought to be asleep, reopening Hollywood's old wound. Because Natalie Wood may be gone, but the questions surrounding her never died. The story of a woman terrified of water yet found drowned at sea still leaves millions unsettled. And somewhere within those faded memories, people still recall Walken's sorrowful eyes, the eyes of the last man to see Natalie alive. He didn't cry nor defend himself. He simply let the memories speak for him. And perhaps after 40 years, that was all he could do, speak half the truth and keep the other half to himself for the rest of his life. After that final interview, Christopher Walken almost completely withdrew from the public eye. He lived quietly by the eastern shore, where the winds were gentler and people spoke less of the past. A small house, a wooden chair, a cup of hot tea, and the crackle of an old radio each morning, that was all he needed. To many, he remained a legend. But to Walken, perhaps he only wanted to be an ordinary man, resting in the silence between the waves, the sound he could never forget for 40 years. Natalie Wood, meanwhile, lives on in the memory of millions, not as the victim of a tragedy, but as an icon of an era. She was not only the actress of West Side Story or Rebel Without a Cause, but the image of a woman who dared to love, to live, to dream. Her daughter, Natasha Gregson Wagner, once said in a 2020 interview, "I want people to remember my mother for how she lived, not for how she died." The audience applauded. Yet behind that moment lingered a silence, one reserved for the things left unsaid, for memories that never found closure. Even as Hollywood entered a new century, it could not escape the shadow of that Thanksgiving night in 1981. Whenever people speak of the great mysteries of the film capital, Natalie Wood's name always returns like a scar that never heals. Documentaries, renewed investigations, endless theories, all proving just one thing: the truth can be buried, but it never disappears. As for Christopher Walken, no matter how far he ran, he carried it with him like a part of his body, like a shadow always following under the stage lights. Friends said that whenever he mentioned Natalie, his voice softened and his gaze drifted far away. Once, when asked if he still thought about that night, he quietly replied, "I think there will always be something left unsaid." That was how he ended the story, not with a confession, but with the quiet sadness of a man who had lived too long with memory. Now, both Natalie Wood and Christopher Walken belong to different chapters of history. Only the audience remains still unable to let go of one question that night beyond the sea and the darkness. What else drifted away with Natalie? Perhaps no one will ever know. Yet, in the Catalina night breeze where the sea and sky merge into one, people say that if you listen closely, you can still hear the waves whispering like the faint breath of a secret that never truly sleeps. What about you? Do you believe that after more than 40 years, Christopher Walken has finally spoken the truth? Or was it simply his way of freeing himself from the burden that Hollywood forced him to carry for half a lifetime? Natalie Wood is gone, but her story that cold night on the Catalina Sea still haunts us as if it happened only yesterday. A star extinguished, a man who chose silence, and a secret forever adrift between the waves. What do you think of that silence? Is it guilt? Or the only way to survive in a world where a single word can destroy a career? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to share this video with those who love the untold stories behind Hollywood's glittering lights, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next journey where together we revisit the people, the memories, and the secrets that once made the whole world hold its breath. Thank you for watching until the end, and see you in the next story where the lights of Hollywood fade. But the truth still remains waiting to be told.